At my niece's luxury wedding, my name tag humiliated me in front of everyone. It said, "The rural old lady paying for everything." I just smiled and walked inside. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're watching from. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones we once loved like our own children. I have always believed weddings were supposed to bring families closer together. Maybe that sounds old-fashioned now. At 67 years old, I still believe in handwritten thank you notes, Sunday dinners after church, and showing up for the people you love, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something. My late husband Walter used to tease me about that. Margaret, he'd laugh, sitting in his recliner with the evening paper folded across his lap. One of these days, this family's gonna drain you dry. And every single time, I gave him the same answer: their family. Back then, I truly believed that meant something sacred. I believed love always came back around eventually. I believed sacrifice mattered. I was wrong. The wedding took place at the Grand Monarch Hotel in downtown Chicago. Everything about it screamed money. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 3 stories high. White orchids lined the marble staircase. A violin quartet played near a champagne tower taller than me. I remember standing in the entrance for a moment, smoothing my navy blue dress with trembling fingers. It wasn't an expensive dress. I bought it from a department store back home in Tennessee, nearly 6 months earlier after Vanessa called me crying about wedding expenses. But I loved that dress. Walter always said navy blue made my eyes look softer. I even wore the pearl earrings he gave me on our 40th anniversary. As I stared into the enormous ballroom, I quietly imagined what he would have said if he had been standing beside me. "You look beautiful, Maggie." For a second, I could almost hear his voice. Then reality returned, cold and sharp. Vanessa wasn't technically my daughter. She was my niece. But after my sister Diane's second divorce, Vanessa spent more time in my house than her own. I drove her to piano lessons every Wednesday for 8 years. I paid for her braces when Diane couldn't afford them. When Vanessa got accepted into Northwestern University, I quietly emptied half my retirement savings so she wouldn't have to start adulthood drowning in student debt. She cried in my kitchen that night, wrapped her arms around me, and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Aunt Margaret." I remember crying too, not because of the money, because I truly believed I mattered to her. The problem started after Vanessa got engaged to Ethan Carlisle. Ethan came from old Chicago money. His parents owned real estate developments across Illinois and Wisconsin. His mother belonged to charity boards with women who wore diamonds to brunch. The first time Vanessa introduced me to them, I noticed the shift immediately. Her voice changed around them, softer, careful, ashamed. "This is my Aunt Margaret," she said quickly. "She's from a small town in Tennessee." Not, "She helped raise me." Not, "She paid for my education." Just, "She's from a small town." I remember smiling anyway. Older women learn how to survive humiliation quietly. It becomes a language of its own after enough years. 3 months before the wedding, Vanessa called me late at night. She sounded panicked. The florist raised prices. The ballroom deposit increased. Ethan's parents expect something elegant. I sat at my kitchen table listening while cold rain tapped against the windows. Then she started crying. "I just want one perfect day." That sentence broke me, because I remembered being a young bride once too. The next morning, I transferred another $40,000 into her wedding account. By the end of the engagement, I had contributed nearly $85,000 total. Almost all my remaining savings. I told myself it was worth it. Family mattered. Love mattered. Vanessa mattered, at least that's what I believed before I saw that name tag. The young woman at the reception desk handed it to me with a cheerful smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Collins." I glanced down casually. Then my entire body went still. Elegant gold lettering. Cream-colored cardstock. And those words. "The rural old lady paying for everything." For a moment, I honestly wondered if my heart had stopped. The sounds around me faded. The laughter, the music, the clinking champagne glasses. Everything blurred except those 8 cruel words sitting in my trembling hands. The hostess leaned closer. "Oh my God. I'm so sorry. There must have been some mistake." But deep down, I already knew it wasn't a mistake at all. I stood there for another few seconds holding that name tag in my hand. People brushed past me toward the ballroom doors, laughing, fixing tuxedo jackets, balancing champagne flutes between manicured fingers. Nobody noticed the older woman standing near the entrance trying not to fall apart. Or maybe they noticed. Maybe they just didn't care that I slowly slipped the card into my purse. Then I lifted my chin, smoothed my dress again, and walked inside like nothing had happened. That's what women from my generation do. We survive humiliation quietly. The ballroom looked like something from a movie. Tall candles flickered across mirrored tables. White roses floated in crystal bowls. A jazz trio played softly near the dance floor, while servers carried silver trays filled with shrimp cocktails and tiny desserts that looked too pretty to eat. Everything smelled expensive: vanilla candles, fresh flowers, wine older than some of the guests, and somewhere beneath all that beauty, I felt something ugly moving underneath the surface. Like I didn't belong there anymore. That I spotted Vanessa near the head table. She looked stunning. Her dress sparkled under the chandelier lights like fresh snow under moonlight. Her hair was pinned perfectly. Diamonds rested against her neck. Diamonds Ethan's mother had proudly announced were a Carlisle family tradition. For a moment, I still saw the little girl who used to run barefoot through my backyard chasing fireflies. Then she turned toward a group of bridesmaids. One of them whispered something in her ear. The entire group laughed, and Vanessa looked directly at me. Not warmly, not lovingly, almost nervously, like she was afraid I had heard something. That feeling settled deep into my stomach. Cocktail hour started shortly after. I wandered toward the edge of the room, trying to stay out of the way. Older people become experts at that too, making ourselves smaller, quieter, less inconvenient. A young server offered me champagne. I smiled politely and took a glass even though my hands were trembling too badly to drink it. That's when I heard them point to bridesmaids standing only a few feet away. She actually paid for most of this? The other girl laughed softly. Well, I guess. Farm money spends the same. Then another voice chimed in. Vanessa said her aunt still shops at Walmart and thinks Olive Garden is fancy. More laughter, sharp, careless, cruel in the effortless way wealthy people sometimes become cruel. I stared down into my champagne glass. Tiny bubbles floated upward quietly. I suddenly remembered packing Vanessa's school lunches when she was 9 years old. Turkey sandwiches cut into little triangles. Apple slices sprinkled with lemon juice so they wouldn't turn brown. Small notes folded into napkins. You're gonna do great on your spelling test. Funny the things a woman remembers when her heart is breaking. Not the big sacrifices. The tiny ones. I tried convincing myself the girls were just immature. Young people say stupid things sometimes. But then I saw Vanessa again. One bridesmaid leaned toward her and whispered something while glancing in my direction. Vanessa covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. That hurt more than the name tag. Because humiliation from strangers is one thing. Humiliation from someone you helped raise feels personal. Like watching your own child become ashamed of your existence. I suddenly didn't feel hungry anymore. The ballroom lights looked harsher now. Too bright. Too cold. I quietly placed my untouched champagne glass onto a passing tray and looked around the room full of people wearing $1,000 smiles. And for the first time that evening, I began wondering if Walter had been right all along. Maybe this family really had drained me dry. I excused myself quietly and walked toward the restroom hallway. Not because I needed the restroom. I just needed a place where nobody could see my face. The music from the ballroom faded behind me with every step. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor, while hotel staff hurried past carrying flower arrangements and trays of untouched desserts. Nobody looked at me twice. If that's another thing about getting older. People stop noticing when you disappeared. I stopped near a large window overlooking downtown Chicago. The city lights shimmered against the dark evening sky. Yellow taxis crawled below like tiny glowing insects. Beautiful. Busy, cold. I placed one hand against the glass and finally allowed myself to breathe. Slowly, carefully, because I could feel something dangerous building inside my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Something sadder than anger. The realization that I had spent years earning a seat at tables where people secretly laughed at me. A few minutes later, my sister Diane appeared at the end of the hallway. Even from far away, she looked beautiful in her emerald green gown. Diane had always been the glamorous one between us. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect ability to pretend everything was fine. There you are, she said with a quick smile. People are asking where you went. I studied her face carefully, waiting, wondering if she knew about the name tag, if she knew about the jokes, if everyone knew except me. I needed some air. I answered softly. Diane nodded too quickly. Well, weddings are stressful. There was something strange about the way she avoided eye contact. Her fingers kept adjusting the bracelet on her wrist. She only did that when she felt nervous. I had known my sister for 64 years, long enough to recognize guilt. Then she lowered her voice. Margaret, don't take anything personally tonight, all right? That sentence landed harder than she probably intended, because people only say that when there's already something to forgive. That I felt my stomach tighten again. What exactly am I not supposed to take personally? Diane hesitated, just for a second, but that second told me everything. Oh, you know how young people joke nowadays, she said quickly. Vanessa's under a lot of pressure. Young people joke. Funny how cruelty always becomes a joke when older women are the ones being hurt. That I looked back out at the city lights. You knew about the name tag. It wasn't a question. Diane went silent. That silence hurt more than any answer could have. Finally, she sighed heavily. It was supposed to be funny, Margaret. Funny. That word echoed inside my head. That I thought about the $85,000, the retirement savings, the sleepless nights balancing my checkbook after every wedding payment, the little cottage Walter and I once dreamed of buying near the Smoky Mountains before he got sick. Gone. All gone, and somehow, I was the joke. Diane suddenly grabbed my hand. Please don't make a scene tonight. There it was. Not. Are you okay? Not. She shouldn't have done that. Not even. I'm sorry. Just, please don't embarrass the family. I slowly pulled my hand away. And in that moment, something inside me became very still, very cold, because for the first time all evening, I stopped feeling hurt and started seeing things clearly. I stood beside that window for another minute after Diane walked away. The city lights outside looked blurry now, not because of tears. That I wasn't crying anymore. That was the strange part. The pain had settled somewhere deeper, somewhere quieter, like a door slowly closing inside me. Back in the ballroom, the wedding coordinator was directing guests toward the reception tables. People smiled at me politely as I walked past them. That kind of polite smile wealthy people master early in life. Warm enough to look kind, cold enough to keep distance. That I followed the seating chart near the entrance until I found my name. Table 17. Near the kitchen doors. Not with family, not with relatives, not even close to the bridal party. Just table 17. Beside two accountants from Ethan's father's company and an older couple I had never seen before in my life. I stared at the chart quietly for a moment. Then I laughed under my breath. A small laugh. The kind that escapes when disappointment becomes too familiar to surprise you anymore. Walter would have noticed immediately that my husband had always been protective in quiet ways. Not loud, not aggressive, but observant. If someone interrupted me at dinner, Walter would gently bring the conversation back to me. If somebody made me uncomfortable, he sensed it before I even spoke. Once, years ago, a man at church mocked my southern accent during a fundraiser. Walter smiled politely at him all evening, then donated anonymously to the church in the other man's name, so everyone spent months thanking him for generosity he never showed. That was Walter. Quiet dignity. Quiet revenge. That I suddenly missed him so badly my chest physically hurt. I made my way to table 17 while guests filled the ballroom with conversation and laughter. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said, Margaret, sit with us. Nobody noticed where I had been placed, or maybe they did. Maybe people ignore uncomfortable things when there's enough champagne involved. The older woman seated beside me introduced herself as Linda. Her husband worked in commercial real estate with Ethan's father. She smiled kindly. You look beautiful tonight. 3 simple words. And somehow that tiny kindness almost broke me more than the cruelty had. Because when people have been cold to you long enough, warmth starts feeling unfamiliar. Dinner service began shortly after. Waiters carried plates of filet mignon and lobster tails beneath golden chandelier light. That I watched Vanessa and Ethan move from table to table greeting guests, laughing, posing for photographs, accepting compliments like royalty greeting subjects. But they skipped table 17 entirely. Not by accident. Deliberately. That I knew that because Vanessa glanced toward me once while passing nearby, then quickly looked away. Like eye contact itself made her uncomfortable. That I cut into my steak slowly, but couldn't taste anything. Across the room, I saw Ethan's mother raising a champagne glass while proudly introducing family members to investors and business partners. Vanessa stood beside her smiling perfectly, polished, elegant, carefully curated. And suddenly I understood something painful. Vanessa wasn't embarrassed because I was cruel or loud or difficult. She was embarrassed because I reminded people where she came from a small town life, a struggling family, a woman who still believed love mattered more than appearances. Then, just as dessert plates arrived, I noticed someone watching me from across the ballroom, one of the older waitresses. She hesitated for a moment before quietly walking toward my table. And the expression on her face told me she knew something I hadn't heard. Yet, something worse. The waitress stopped beside my chair holding a silver tray with untouched coffee cups. She looked to be somewhere around my age, maybe early 70s. Soft gray curls framed her face, and there was something careful in her eyes, the kind of look women give each other when they recognize pain without needing words. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly. "Would you mind helping me for just a second?" I knew immediately she wasn't really asking about coffee. Still, I stood politely and followed her away from table 17 as she led me toward a quieter service hallway near the kitchen entrance. The noise from the ballroom softened behind us. I could still hear distant laughter and clinking glasses, but now there were also kitchen sounds mixed in. Plates moving, staff calling orders, industrial dishwashers humming. Real sounds. Honest sounds. Not polished like the ballroom. Not pretending to be perfect. The waitress stopped near a supply station and looked at me carefully. "I hope you don't think this is inappropriate," she said softly. But I felt like somebody should tell you the truth. My chest tightened instantly, because deep down, I already knew this conversation was going to hurt. She lowered her voice even further. "I worked the rehearsal dinner last night." I said nothing. I wasn't trying to overhear anybody, she continued quickly. But the bridal party had been drinking, and people talk loudly when they think workers are invisible. That sentence hit me harder than she probably realized, because older women understand that feeling too. Invisible, useful enough to serve people, never important enough to notice. The waitress glanced nervously toward the ballroom entrance before continuing. One of the girls asked about the seating cards. Said the labels were mean. My fingers slowly tightened around my purse strap, and your niece laughed. The waitress whispered, not smiled, not ignored it. Laughed. I felt something cold spread through my body, slowly, quietly, like ice forming across deep water. Then came the sentence I would never forget for the rest of my life. The waitress swallowed hard before repeating it. She said, the woman hesitated. "Just keep Aunt Margaret happy until the final wire. Transfer clears." For a second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. The hallway suddenly felt too small, too warm, too bright. All evening I had been trying to convince myself the humiliation was accidental, immature, insensitive, but not cruel. Now that illusion shattered completely. The waitress looked heartbroken for me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I just thought you deserved to know." And strangely enough, I appreciated her honesty more than every fake smile in that ballroom combined. Because truth may hurt older women, but disrespect destroys us. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me." My voice sounded calm. Too calm. That frightened me a little, because I realized something in that moment. The sadness was disappearing, and something else was taking its place. Not rage, not revenge, clarity. Cold, painful clarity. The waitress touched my arm gently before returning toward the kitchen, and I remained standing there alone in the service hallway, listening to distant wedding music echo through the walls, thinking about every birthday card I had mailed Vanessa, every Christmas gift, every sacrifice, every moment I chose her happiness over my own comfort. Then I remembered something suddenly. The final payment $40,000. My financial advisor had told me earlier that morning the transfer was scheduled for midnight after final vendor confirmation, which meant one thing. The money had not gone through yet, and for the first time all evening, I realized I still had a choice. I stayed in that hallway for several more minutes after the waitress left, not moving, not crying, just thinking. Funny how betrayal changes the sound of a room. Only an hour earlier, the wedding music had sounded joyful. Now every laugh from the ballroom felt sharp enough to cut skin. Every burst of applause sounded fake, manufactured, like the entire evening had been built on top of a lie. And maybe it had. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered above my financial advisor's number. For years, Harold Bennett had handled every account Walter and I owned. Retirement funds, life insurance, The sale of Walter's truck after he passed away. Harold knew exactly how carefully I protected every dollar, which is why he had sounded concerned earlier that morning when he called to confirm the final wedding transfer. Margaret, he'd said gently, this is a substantial amount of money. I remembered laughing softly back then. It's for family. God, how many foolish decisions have women justified with those 3 words? I finally pressed call. Harold answered almost immediately. Margaret? Everything all right? I glanced back toward the ballroom doors to know nothing was all right. But strangely enough, my voice came out steady. I need to ask you something, I said quietly. Has the final transfer gone through yet? There was a short pause while I heard papers shifting on the other end. Then Harold answered, no, it's still pending vendor authorization. What? Pending. The words settled over me like cold rain. Pending meant unfinished, reversible, still within my control. That I closed my eyes for a moment. And suddenly I saw myself from the outside, that a 67-year-old widow standing alone in a service hallway, while the family she sacrificed everything for celebrated nearby using her money. Not her love, not her kindness, her money. That realization changed something fundamental inside me, because I understood then that this wedding had never truly been about family.it was about image, status, presentation, and I had simply been the invisible woman financing the illusion. Margaret? Harold asked carefully, do you want me to proceed with the transfer tonight? I opened my eyes again. Slowly, from somewhere inside the ballroom, I heard Vanessa laughing. Bright, carefree. Not the laugh of someone who loved me, the laugh of someone certain she had already won. And for the first time that evening, I stopped worrying about ruining the wedding, because suddenly I realized something important. Vanessa had already ruined it herself. Harold, I said softly, if I stop the transfer now, what happens? Another pause. Then his professional voice returned. Well, several balances connected to the venue and vendors would remain unpaid until another payment method is provided. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because life sometimes arranges justice so neatly it barely needs our help. I looked down at my wedding bracelet, the pearl bracelet Walter gave me during our final anniversary together before cancer took him. He had squeezed my hand that night and whispered, promise me something, Maggie. I smiled sadly, remembering it. What? Don't spend the rest of your life letting people use your good heart against you. At the time, I thought he was worrying too much. Now standing in that hallway, I finally understood. Harold spoke again carefully. Margaret, would you like me to cancel the transfer? I stared toward the ballroom doors one last time. Then I answered calmly, yes. And the moment I said it, I felt something I hadn't felt all evening. Peace. Cold, steady, undeniable peace. After I ended the call with Harold, I didn't move right away. I simply stood there in the service hallway holding my phone while the sounds of the wedding continued behind the walls. Music, laughter, glasses clinking. None of them knew what had just happened. None of them knew the invisible old woman they had mocked had quietly pulled the foundation out from under the entire evening. And strangely enough, that thought didn't make me feel powerful. That it made me feel tired. Deeply tired. That I took a slow breath and returned toward the ballroom. As soon as the doors opened, warm golden light spilled over me again. The room looked even more extravagant now. Towering floral arrangements, soft violin music, hundreds of candles flickering against crystal glassware, the perfect wedding. At least on the surface, that I wondered how many beautiful things in life only survive because somebody silent keeps paying for them. The wedding planner rushed past me looking stressed. She held an iPad tightly against her chest while whispering urgently to another staff member. That I noticed her expression immediately. Confused, worried. Good. That meant Harold had already done it. That I returned quietly to table 17, just as the master of ceremonies announced speeches. Guests applauded enthusiastically. Vanessa and Ethan moved toward the center stage beneath a glowing chandelier, while photographers crowded around them. From far away, Vanessa still looked radiant. Perfect smile, perfect posture, perfect little performance. That I wondered if she had any idea her perfect evening was beginning to crack underneath her feet. Ethan spoke first. He thanked the guests, the wedding party, his parents, business partners, mentors, people who supported their future. Then Vanessa took the microphone. My chest tightened slightly despite everything. A small foolish part of me still hoped. Maybe she would finally acknowledge me. Maybe somewhere beneath all the vanity and embarrassment, the little girl I raised still existed. Vanessa smiled toward the crowd. I just want to thank everyone who made tonight possible. Applause filled the ballroom. Then she turned toward Ethan's parents, especially the Carlisle family, for welcoming me with such generosity and elegance. More applause that I waited, but my name never came. Not once. Not even politely. Not even out of obligation to $85,000. Years of love. Years of sacrifice. Reduced to silence that I looked around the room slowly. Some relatives avoided eye contact. Others suddenly seemed very interested in their wine glasses, because deep down, people know when something cruel is happening. Most just choose comfort over courage. Then, unexpectedly, Ethan looked toward me. For a brief moment, genuine discomfort crossed his face. Almost guilt, he reached for the microphone again. And of course, he added quickly, we should also thank Aunt Margaret for being here tonight. Being here, not for helping, not for sacrificing, not for funding half the wedding. Just being here. I almost smiled, because the insult had become so absurd it circled back around to honesty. Then Ethan smiled nervously toward me. Aunt Margaret, he said, would you like to say a few words? The entire ballroom turned toward my table, hundreds of eyes, waiting, and suddenly, for the first time all evening, the room finally saw me. For a moment, nobody moved. The ballroom became strangely quiet after Ethan handed me the attention he clearly hadn't planned to give. I could feel hundreds of eyes resting on me from across the room. Some curious, some uncomfortable, some already expecting an emotional old woman to embarrass herself. That's the thing people forget about older women. They mistake silence for weakness. I slowly placed my napkin beside my untouched dessert plate and stood up. My knees felt stiff, but my hands no longer trembled. That surprised me. A few hours ago, humiliation had shaken me so badly I could barely hold a champagne glass. Now I felt strangely calm, like something inside me had already broken completely, leaving only clarity behind. I walked toward the stage slowly while guests watched in silence. The chandeliers above looked blindingly bright now, beautiful and cold, just like the evening itself. Vanessa smiled nervously as I approached, not lovingly, not warmly, nervously, because somewhere deep down, she knew I had finally seen who she really was. Ethan handed me the microphone. Thank you for being here, Aunt Margaret, he said. Again quietly. I looked at him for a second. Poor boy. I almost felt sorry for him, because men like Ethan often marry appearances before they understand character. I turned toward the crowd. Dozens of elegant faces stared back at me beneath candlelight. People waiting for a sweet speech. A harmless toast. Something sentimental from the old aunt at table 17. Instead, I smiled softly. You know, I began. When Vanessa was little, she used to hate thunderstorms. A few guests chuckled politely. I heard Vanessa exhale quietly beside me. Relief. She thought I was going to play my role, the harmless old woman. She'd run into my room during storms and crawl into bed beside me. I continued. And every single time, she'd ask the same question. I paused slightly. She'd say, Aunt Margaret, are we going to be okay? The room stayed quiet. I looked directly at Vanessa. And I always told her yes. Her smile weakened slightly. I adjusted the microphone gently. I paid for piano lessons because I wanted her dreams to grow larger than our small town. Silence spread wider now. I paid for college, because I didn't want her starting adult life buried under debt. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, and I helped pay for this beautiful wedding because I believed families should help each other when they can. Now even the servers had stopped moving. Vanessa finally stepped closer. Aunt Margaret, she whispered tensely, but I continued calmly. The funny thing about generosity, I said softly, is that it reveals character on both sides. You could feel the tension now, heavy, sharp, the kind of silence that makes wealthy rooms panic because truth is finally standing in the center of them. I slowly reached into my purse, and then I placed the cream-colored name tag onto the podium beneath the spotlight. Gasps rippled across the ballroom instantly, because now everyone could read it. The rural old lady paying for everything. Vanessa's face turned completely pale. Ethan looked stunned. And somewhere near the back of the room, I noticed Diane close her eyes in quiet defeat. I looked out across the crowd one final time. Then I smiled sadly. The tragic part, I said quietly, is that the sentence wasn't even wrong. The ballroom froze, not the polite silence from earlier. This was different, heavy, humiliating. The kind of silence that settles over a room when people suddenly realize they've been witnessing cruelty disguised as sophistication. Nobody laughed now. Nobody smiled. Because once the words were sitting beneath the spotlight for everyone to see, the joke stopped being funny. Vanessa stared at the name tag like she wished it would disappear. "Aunt Margaret," she whispered again. But her voice sounded small now. Fragile, like someone suddenly realizing actions still have consequences even in expensive dresses. That I looked at her calmly, N.O. yelling, N.O. crying. That almost seemed to frighten her more. Ethan stepped toward the podium quickly. "There's obviously been some misunderstanding here," he said nervously to the guests. Misunderstanding. Another wealthy word people use when they're desperate to avoid the truth. That I turned slightly toward him. "No," I said gently. "There wasn't." You could almost feel the room tightening around us. That I picked up the name tag slowly between my fingers. "This was printed intentionally," I continued calmly. "And honestly, I should probably thank whoever made it." Several guests exchanged shocked glances, because now they understood something important. I wasn't embarrassed anymore. They were. Vanessa's face tightened. "Can we please talk about this privately?" she whispered through clenched teeth. "Privately. Interesting how people only want privacy after public humiliation starts pointing back at them." I smiled sadly. "Oh, sweetheart," I said softly. "You already made this public the moment your guests started laughing." The room became even quieter somehow. Near the back of the ballroom, I noticed Ethan's mother looking furious, not ashamed, furious. Probably because elegant events aren't supposed to crack open in front of investors and business partners. But life doesn't care about perfect table settings. Truth eventually reaches every room. I looked back toward the crowd. "You all probably think tonight is about a wedding," I said quietly. "But honestly, tonight taught me something much more important." Nobody interrupted me now. Even the band had stopped playing. "I spent years believing love meant endless sacrifice," I continued. "I thought if you kept giving enough, eventually people would value your heart." I paused briefly. "But some people don't value hearts." I glanced at the floral arrangements surrounding the stage. "They value what hearts can buy." Vanessa suddenly reached for my arm. "Please stop," she whispered desperately. And for the first time all evening, I finally saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing the image she built. Those are two very different things. I gently removed her hand from my arm. Then I looked directly at Ethan. "You thanked me earlier for being here tonight," I said calmly. He swallowed hard but nodded. "Well," I continued softly, "you should know something." The entire ballroom held its breath. The final payment for this wedding was supposed to process tonight. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. Not sadness. Panic. Real panic. And that told everyone in the room exactly what mattered most to her. I folded the name tag carefully and placed it back into my purse. Then I smiled one final time. "But fortunately for me," I said quietly, "I finally learned the difference between generosity and being used." And somewhere behind me, near the ballroom entrance, I suddenly heard raised voices from the wedding staff. The moment those raised voices echoed from the ballroom entrance, the atmosphere shifted completely. Not elegant anymore. Not glamorous. People began turning in their chairs, whispering to each other, while hotel staff hurried across the room with tight expressions. The perfect wedding finally had cracks everyone could see. And once cracks appear in expensive things, panic spreads fast. A man in a dark suit approached Ethan near the stage and whispered urgently into his ear. I watched Ethan's face drain of color almost instantly. Then he whispered something back sharply. The man shook his head. Not possible. Not fixable. Whatever he was hearing, it was real. Vanessa noticed the panic immediately. "What's going on?" she asked under her breath. Ethan didn't answer right away. That silence terrified her more than words could. Finally, he leaned closer to her. Even from several feet away, I caught two words. "Payment issue." That was all it took. Vanessa's expression shattered completely. The carefully trained bridal smile disappeared. And underneath it, for the first time all evening, everyone saw something raw. Entitlement meeting reality. The wedding planner rushed onto the stage trying to keep her voice low. But panic always grows louder in quiet rooms. Several nearby guests started overhearing fragments. Vendor authorization. Hotel accounting. Remaining balance. The whispers spread across the ballroom like spilled wine across white linen. People pulled out phones, Relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some guests suddenly became very interested in leaving early because wealthy people love luxury, but they fear public embarrassment even more. Vanessa turned toward me slowly, and I will never forget that look on her face. Not heartbreak, not shame. Calculation. Pure frantic calculation. Like her mind was desperately trying to figure out whether she could still fix the situation before people noticed the truth. That hurt more than I expected. Even after everything, a small part of me had still hoped she cared about losing me. Instead, she cared about losing the ballroom. Aunt Margaret, she whispered urgently, stepping toward me. Please, we can fix this. We. Interesting word. There had been no we. When they mocked me, no we. When they seated me beside the kitchen, no we. When my name became a punchline. But suddenly now, there was we. I looked at her quietly. Then I noticed mascara beginning to gather beneath her eyes. Not from grief, from stress. Because the illusion was collapsing. And maintaining illusions is exhausting work. You embarrassed me in front of everyone, Vanessa whispered shakily. The irony almost made me smile that I repeated her words softly back to her. In front of everyone. She froze. Because now she heard it too. Now she finally understood what public humiliation feels like when you're the one standing beneath the lights. Nearby, Ethan's mother was already speaking furiously with hotel management, but I overheard words like, unacceptable. Contract obligations. Reputation. Not once did I hear, Margaret. Funny, isn't it? Even now, after all the damage, nobody asked whether I was hurt. Only whether the evening could still be saved. Then Vanessa reached for my hands, tears finally spilling now. Please, she whispered. Don't do this to me on my wedding day. And for one long quiet moment, I almost answered. But then I remembered the name tag, the laughter, the rehearsal dinner comment. Keep Aunt Margaret happy until the final wire transfer clears. And suddenly, my sympathy disappeared completely. Vanessa's hands trembled around mine. Not with love, not with regret, with desperation. The ballroom around us had completely transformed now. Earlier it had sounded like celebration. Now it sounded like damage control. Whispering guests, hurried footsteps, tense conversations hidden behind fake smiles. The illusion of perfection was dying in real time. Please, Vanessa whispered again. You're ruining everything. I stared at her quietly for a moment. Then I asked the only question that suddenly mattered to me. Vanessa, if the money had already cleared, would you still be talking to me right now? That question hit her harder than yelling ever could, because she couldn't answer it. And silence tells the truth faster than words. Behind us, Ethan was still arguing quietly with hotel management. I overheard fragments again. Temporary authorization, account issue, vendor hold. His father looked furious now. Not at me specifically. At embarrassment. At inconvenienced. At the horrifying possibility that rich people in expensive suits might gossip about the Carlisle wedding for years. Vanessa finally lowered her voice even further. I said stupid things, okay? She hissed. I was stressed. Stressed. Interesting excuse. Nobody ever calls older women stressed when they cry quietly alone in kitchens balancing bills. Nobody excuses our pain that gently. I looked around the ballroom slowly and could see the flowers, the candles, the orchestra, the giant wedding cake sparkling beneath decorative lights. So much beauty, and somehow none of it had room for kindness. That realization felt sadder than the betrayal itself. Then Diane approached us carefully to my older sister suddenly looked. Exhausted. Older, smaller somehow. Margaret, she said softly. Please, let's just get through tonight. There it was again. Not, you deserved better. Not, we hurt you. Just, let's survive the embarrassment. Families can become very strange when appearances matter more than honesty. I turned toward Diane slowly. Do you remember Walter's funeral? I asked quietly. She looked confused by the question, then nodded carefully. I could barely stand that day, I continued. But Vanessa held my hand through the entire service. My voice almost cracked then, because that memory was real. Once upon a time, she had loved me. Or at least I thought she did. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears again. Real tears this time. And for one dangerous second, my heart softened. That's the curse of women like me. Even after being wounded, we still search desperately for the version of people we once loved. Then Ethan's mother suddenly interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. This situation needs to be handled immediately. No concern, no compassion. Just irritation. She looked directly at me. If there's been some financial misunderstanding, I'm sure we can discuss it privately instead of humiliating everyone. Humiliating everyone. I almost laughed, because apparently humiliating one old woman publicly had been perfectly acceptable, but embarrassing wealthy guests, that crossed the line. I looked directly back at her, and suddenly I understood the entire evening perfectly. People like them had never truly seen me as family, just useful. Useful people are welcomed warmly, right until they stop paying. I stood there looking at Ethan's mother while the ballroom waited for my answer. The chandeliers still glowed warmly above us. The orchestra sat frozen in silence. Half-finished champagne glasses sparkled on tables beside untouched wedding cake. Everything still looked beautiful, and yet the entire room felt empty now. Because once respect disappears, elegance means nothing. I took a slow breath. Then I looked toward Vanessa one last time. She stood there in her expensive white dress with mascara streaked beneath her eyes, clutching the edge of the podium like she was trying not to fall apart. And suddenly, I didn't see a villain anymore. I saw a frightened little girl who spent so many years trying to escape her past that she became ashamed of anyone who reminded her where she came from. That realization hurt differently, because bitterness doesn't appear overnight. It grows slowly. Fed by insecurity. By comparison. By the desperate need to belong in rooms that were never built for kindness in. The first place. Vanessa's voice finally cracked. Aunt Margaret. I'm sorry. The words barely rose above a whisper. And for the first time all evening, they sounded real. Not polished, not strategic, just broken. Tears slid down her cheeks as she shook her head slowly. I don't know when I became this person. Neither did I. That was the tragedy of it. The ballroom remained completely silent. Nobody cared about the flowers anymore. Or the contracts. Or the unpaid balances. Because suddenly this wasn't about money. It was about something much older. The quiet heartbreak between people who once loved each other and slowly forgot how. I walked toward Vanessa slowly. Then I reached up and fixed a loose strand of hair near her face the same way I used to when she was little. Her lips trembled instantly. I loved you. Long before this wedding, I said softly. And I'll probably love you long after tonight. She started crying harder. But love is not permission to disrespect people, I continued gently. Especially the ones who carried you when life was hard. Then I turned toward Ethan. You seem like a decent man, I told him honestly. So I hope one day you understand something. He looked stunned, but listened carefully. Character matters a lot more than appearances once the music stops. He lowered his eyes quietly, because deep down he already knew I was right. I picked up my purse. The ballroom watched me carefully now, not like an invisible old woman anymore, but like someone they had underestimated. Funny how quickly respect appears once money disappears. As I walked toward the ballroom exit, I heard footsteps behind me. Vanessa. She wrapped her arms around me suddenly from behind, just like she used to when she was 16. For 1 second, neither of us moved. I'm sorry, she whispered again through tears. This time, I believed her, not because the damage disappeared, but because pain had finally stripped away the performance. I gently touched her hand. Then I walked out of the ballroom alone. The cool night air hit my face the moment the hotel doors opened. And for the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I lost family, but because I finally stopped losing myself trying to keep everyone else happy. Walter had been right all along. A good heart is a beautiful thing, but only when it belongs to someone who remembers their own worth too.